Howdy folks, John here. Welcome to part 6 of the R2-D2 build series. Today we are getting into the fun world of Droid electronics, specifically the sound system. We'll be looking at the speakers, the amplifier, ground loop isolation, and of course the soundboard and trigger. Let's get started. This represents all the sound system components I'm using in my R2 build. And just like the rest of electronics for R2, there's many different options, and this just represents a few of them. And it may also be of interest to you if you're controlling your R2 system with an RC radio system. And let's face it, if we're building R2, he needs sound. It's half his personality, pretty much. And with this system that I've come up with, I can control up to 110 sound files with just 2 RC channels. So fairly powerful considering the limited number of channels it's using. And the heart of that is my trigger and soundboard, which we will get to last. Just like the rest of the electronics, there will be links to all this stuff below in the description if you want to check it out yourself and read up on the specs and such. So starting at the basics, if you're going to have sound in your R2, you're going to need speakers. And I'm just using a very common speaker form factor here. It's the 3.5-inch two-ways, and they're going to be mounted behind the front center vents of R2, basically on top of each other. You can put them elsewhere in your Droid and use different sizes as well. But for the most part, you know, these work fairly well, and they do give good sound, as you heard. I don't know how well my lapel mic is picking that up, but plenty loud, and I've just got it at half volume. These are rated at 80 watts, I think 40 watts RMS. They're two-way, like I said, made by American Bass. These ones were on sale, that's why I got them. Powering your speakers, however, you're going to need an amplifier. And the one I chose is this little ZK1002T. These are really neat little amplifiers. Powerful at 100 watts. Small form factor, and they accept a nice broad voltage input range of 12 to 24 volts, so will work with most R2 builds. I'll be running my R2 with 6S LiPos, and I'm feeding this thing right now with a 6S LiPo, so just over 24 volts, and it's working great. It's got volume, bass, and treble control, which I thought was pretty important. A lot of R2 sounds are quite tinny, so it's nice to be able to turn that treble down to, you know, soften them up a little bit and turn the bass up. And it not only accepts standard audio signals through a 3.5mm stereo plug, it also accepts Bluetooth. There's a Bluetooth antenna here, so if you've got your sound files playing through a Bluetooth device, you can also use this amp. So really cool little amplifier, doesn't cost too much. Upstream of the amp via the 3.5mm cable is a ground loop isolator. And these are important to get rid of hum in your system. If your grounds are at different voltage potentials, generally the amp will start humming, and sure enough mine was as well. Here, let's just unplug this and plug the amp directly into my soundboard. Hopefully you can detect that little bit of hum. And that's without the ground loop isolator. If I plug it back in, hum is now gone. Then upstream of this, we've got our soundboard and trigger. Let's get into that. Okay, I'll try to cover this fairly quickly in enough detail though that you can understand how it works. So I've just got a little Adafruit FX soundboard here. This is the 16 megabyte version. And I've got one of these little single channel RC relay switches. And this just activates this relay when the RC channel outputs in one direction or the other. I'm just going to turn the volume down. We'll activate it. So a little blue light comes on. You can hear the relay click. And then I've got all this hooked up to a servo-controlled 12-position rotary switch. And I've done a separate video on this little thing if you wanted to see how I built it, how it works. I'll link to it in the card doodad up in the corner or down below in the description. Basically, the way this works is these soundboards, they need a ground to one of these trigger locations. There's 11 on the Adafruit, and when it sees a ground, it will play the sound file or files that are located in that trigger memory location. Like I said, just 2 channels here. One channel sets the output of the rotary switch position, and the other channel controls this trigger. So when I hit the trigger here, it'll just send the ground signal to the rotary switch common pin, and then depending on which position the switch is in, we'll send that ground signal to ground out one of these trigger pins. And it's that simple. And I've just got the RC relay trigger board and the Adafruit board. I've just soldered them both to this little project board, so everything I could contain it in one little handheld unit. The Adafruit works on 5 volts DC, and that's what I'm feeding my RC receiver. I'm just taking the 5 volts off of one of these servo leads and then also inputting them into the Adafruit voltage in and ground pins. And you may be thinking 16 megabytes is nothing, but you have to realize R2 sound files are tiny. You know, they range in size anywhere from about 25 kilobytes up to 60 for some of the longer ones. And I've got 50 sound files on here, and it only is using up just over 3 megabytes. Now, I've also got 3 full songs, which are using up considerably more. I'm actually up to just over 12 megabytes with those 3 songs. I don't know if I'm going to keep them in there or not. And if you're wondering where you get the sound files from, I got all mine through Mr. Badley's files. If you go on to his file folder page, you want to pick the exclusives folder, and inside that folder there'll be Astromech Sounds folder, and within that folder there's a few in there. There's BB8 sounds, but you want obviously the R2 sounds. Now, one thing to note with the Adafruit is it doesn't play MP3s. It only will play WAV files or OGGs. WAV files are uncompressed, so they're way too big, so you'd want to use the OGGs. And all the sound files in the Badley folders, they're all MP3, of course, but you can easily convert MP3s to OGGs on Adafruit's website. They've got a couple of cloud-based options that they recommend. I just use my media player. I use VLC media player on my computers, and it's got an OGG converter in it. So I just dragged all the sound files once I selected which ones I wanted into the VLC folder. Converted them all to OGG in one click. Really slick. And we'll just demo this here real quick. I'm just going to zoom out so we can see this. I'm going to turn the volume back up. So like I said, I've got my trigger. I can trigger this board. I've got it on my momentary. Or I can turn this toggle to have it turned on constantly. So now that relay is closed all the time, and it will just keep playing the files back to back to back over and over again. And the way I've got my files arranged, I kind of did it by mood and alphabetically. So first trigger location or 10 different alarm sounds. We won't go through them all, just do it a couple here. Number 2 is fart sounds. Number 3 are cheerful or happy sounds. Number 4 are sad sounds. Five are all his whistles. 6 is the Leah message. It's a single sound file in this trigger location.
General Kenobi, years ago you served my father in the Clone Wars.
And once you start playing a file, you can't stop it. You have to wait for it to play right through. That's why I cycled the power. So that's the first level, and that's with the rotary switch in positions 1 through 6. And if I hit this toggle, it changes the output of that channel to run 50% and higher. So I'm selecting the positions 7 through 12 now on the rotary switch. And on here I've got 3 songs. So I've got the main theme. We can't play the full thing for copyright, of course. Number 2, I've got the Empire Strikes Back theme. 3 3 is the cantina. And 4 and 5, I don't even have any files yet in those locations. So hopefully that explained it. This thing almost needs its own video to explain everything that it can do. The Adafruit's a super cool little board. Hopefully I gave you a few ideas on the audio system. By all means, there's lots of ways to do this, and this is just one method. But like I said, hopefully it gives you a few ideas. Thanks for watching, folks. We'll see you later. And until next time, happy R2 building.